Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. We're going to be talking about education-led growth by the numbers, and we're going to be diving into some of the education-led growth research data that came out earlier this year. And I'm joined by a panel of experts. We'll introduce them in a moment. But first, just wanted to go over some quick housekeeping. So first of all, this webinar is being recorded. So if you want to come back to it, you want to share it, you've got to jump off at the half hour to get to a meeting, all good. We'll record this and send it to you so you can come back and reference that. The second thing is that underneath this video, you're going to find a couple things. You're going to find a questions box, and you can use this to interact with us, not just ask questions, but also let us know who you are, why you're here, where you're calling in from. We'd love to hear from you. So you can use that underneath the video. Under this video, you'll also find attachments. So if you haven't downloaded the research data yet, if you want a copy of this slide deck, anything like that, you're going to find those resources underneath this video. And finally, you'll find a place where you can rate this session and just give us some feedback. That helps us to understand what you like about webinars and what you want to hear more about. There's an open text. We read all of that to inform future webinars and events. So I want to encourage you to do that. And then the final note that I'll give you is just this webinar platform is going to automatically resize your video based on internet bandwidth. And if you live in the mountains like me, maybe it's making it like grainier. So in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, there's a gear icon. You can override those settings and you can get a better picture. So just know some people have run into that. So just wanted to give you the heads up there so you can see the data on your screen as we're going. Without further ado, I want to go ahead and introduce you to our panelists today. And maybe we'll go from left to right from the screen. So Chris, if you want to introduce yourself first.
Sure thing, Shannon. As always, thanks for having us here today. It's a pleasure to be here. Lindsay and I, we run SaaS Academy Advisors. And in a nutshell, we work with B2B SaaS businesses who are looking to start an academy, build, scale, and scale academies. So kind of across the board, but typically just with B2B companies. And most of the time it's around the numbers we're going to talk about in the first few slides in terms of the business impact and the need for these academies. So I won't ruin those numbers or talk to them much more. But thanks again for having us. And I'm looking forward to digging into the data with you all.
Yeah. And I'll just say, sorry, go ahead, Shannon.
Go for it.
I'll just say a quick hi. Lindsay, Chris said it and put it well. The only thing I'll add is I'm calling in from New Hampshire today, and Chris is located in Massachusetts.
Okay, so which part of New Hampshire?
Great question. The seacoast of New Hampshire, so right outside of Exeter, New Hampshire.
All right, amazing. I think we've probably all talked about this before. I grew up north of Boston, Haverhill. So
yes.
Yes. All right. And then John, if you want to finish off intros here.
All right. Welcome, everybody. I'm in nowhere, Pennsylvania, as it turns out, here today. Thanks for having us. I'm John Lay. I'm the CEO and lead analyst of Talented Learning. We're now in our 12th year. We study the global learning systems market. So we keep track of all the different vendors that are out there, their capabilities. And as our day job, we help organizations buy primarily customer learning management systems. So our clients hire us to help them figure out what they need, define their requirements, and manage a professional buying process through RFP and contracts. So that's who we are. So excited to be here today.
Yeah, excited to have you all, and to have your diverse perspectives too on this data. People who have kind of done the work and then are working across companies. I think each of you offers a great perspective on what you're seeing in the market, things that you're hearing about. So a little bit about this research. So we had surveyed people between November of 2024, January 2025, and just ask people around. So if you were our last webinar, we were talking about the education-led growth framework. How do we use education strategically to drive business outcomes, business impact? And so we're asking questions around the different parts of the education-led growth framework to understand what are people doing today, what's working, what's not working, kind of what's the state of the state. And are using education within their business. And so one of the questions that we asked was around what are you using education to drive? And so Here that this does take into account a variety of audiences, people who educate customers, partners, and or employees. A lot of teams are doing all of those. And what the data found was that majority of people, you'll notice the numbers here do not add up to 100%. They have multiple business outcomes that they're trying to impact, but we're seeing a heavy focus here on retention and on performance. And I'll kick it over to our panel here just to see, like, I know you all said, this wasn't terribly surprising to you. You're seeing this with your clients as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is, when you're measuring these different metrics and thinking about how are we measuring them? What are those priorities? It's interesting because I think, to your point, Shannon, definitely we see customers tracking multiple areas, but usually when they're starting, and this is from the perspective of a B2B SaaS company saying we're starting an education program, it's usually like one metric for that first course, certification program, whatever is launched, as like that primary metric that they're tracking for success or not, and then it kind of trickles down. So it'd be interesting to learn more, and I'm curious to what everyone else thinks of, like, in terms of priority. Does this change if you're focused on educating customers versus partners versus employees, or maybe there's multiple inputs? Like, another one that always comes to mind is the size of the business, right? If you're a Series A seed round company, what kind of metrics matter most? Maybe it's revenue, getting people in the door, versus now you're Series C, D, mezzanine, public, and all of a sudden the only thing that matters is retention in this day and age.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would also add to that, Chris, it's dependent on where the program sits as well. We often advise our clients when we're thinking about metrics that we're bucketing these metrics we're tracking by business outcomes, by department outcomes, by your team outcomes, and even user outcomes as well. But based off of where your program sits will determine those priorities that you need to be aligning with. And I can see where, some of those things shift. I think what I find really intriguing about some of this data as well is like the cost reduction piece of it. We're hearing over and over again, how can we do more with less? How can we reduce costs? So that to me actually was surprising, seeing 57%, this being on the lower side, and that retention and performance piece of it being higher. But I would also say that retention and performance are leading indicators of some of these other pieces, right? If we're seeing solid retention and performance, we're also going to likely see that help our revenue as well. So as Chris was saying, all of these tie together. It's all just going to depend on what we need to prioritize.
For sure, it does tie together, and it is interesting to see cost reduction. When I looked at this, the very first thing I thought was, wow, we're finally maturing. Because I think if you looked at this same chart 5 years ago, that revenue would be about 5 or 10%, as organizations just weren't there. I think the first and lowest hanging fruit is the cost reduction. But the problem is with cost reduction, it has a diminishing return. And so after you reduce that cost, what do you do next year? And it makes it really difficult to keep on finding more and more and more to cut. Eventually, you can't cut anymore. And so I think that organizations, once they maximize that cost reduction, they start moving into the other metrics as more mature metrics to drive towards more go-to-market metrics. And so I think that bodes good for our industry.
I love that perspective on diminishing returns for the cost reduction, John. That's so spot on. And I think something that builds on that, that we're certainly seeing, is now businesses coming and saying, we don't have any more costs to reduce, but we're also looking at now, for every new 100 customers that we bring on, how much more costs or overhead are we going to have to bring to the business? And can we use educational content programmatically as a way to just to keep costs lower per 100 new customers? So it's almost like maybe cost savings. I don't know if that falls in that bucket, but it's the idea of, like, how are we going to spend less to support more customers in the future? And that's been a big one with our customers recently. especially newer ones who are kind of in that Series A, Series B of like, we can't get more funding if we take the normal playbook of for every new, mid-level to enterprise customers, we need another CSM. Like those numbers just don't work. How can we scale this more efficiently from onboarding through support? So I think that maybe falls into that bucket, maybe somewhere else, but this idea of, really scale and how can we use educational content not to incur costs in the first place.
Mm-hmm. I think to put a final bow on that, I'll be the first one to drop AI as that now has reinvigorated the cost reduction argument of, okay, now we can look at all these things that we couldn't squeeze any more cost out of before. Can we now, perhaps? And so that's restarted that conversation, curiously.
I have nothing really to add.
We solved it all in one slide. Drop the mic.
No, I mean, it's just a good point. Every program is different in terms of what they're measuring. And that's where I think you could slice and dice this data all day long. So just, it's one data point that if you put it in your own context, will have its own meaning. So, okay. This was interesting. So we asked people, on average, how long after launching an education initiative do you start measuring impact on business goals? So if we're designing education content with the intention of moving the needle on a business outcome, are we measuring that? Are we able to measure that? How quickly are we measuring that and able to report back to the business? So some of those, right, if we go back here, impact on revenue, retention, performance, cost reduction can take time. It's not all immediate. And what the data found was that 60% of the education leaders surveyed are measuring impact either immediately or within 3 months of launching a new initiative, 9% kind of in that 6 to 12 month range, and a fortunate 28% who are not consistently measuring. And I think this really impacts our ability to tell the story and sell the business on education. But Lindsay, you had mentioned thinking about education as a product and how you talk to your customers about thinking of education like a product and measuring adoption, in the same way that you would a product launch.
Yep, exactly. And a big part of that, when I also saw these data points and looking at this, to everything that you were also listing out, Shannon, it's also like, what impact are we also talking about here? Because we can't always see that immediate impact of our education on how it's impacting retention, for instance. And so if we treat our education like a product and are appropriately measuring it, the way that I'd also look at this timeline is starting to then bucket out what are those metrics that we can track on a consistent basis, right? From 0 to 30 days, let's focus in on the engagement of our education and those metrics. Then from the next span, like 30 and 90 days, let's look a little bit more at the actual impact it now has on the learning and the behavior and how they are using the education. And then past that, we can start to look at much more of the business impact metrics. So I think it's absolutely critical that we're consistently measuring, and we're measuring from the get, but it's also acknowledging what we're able to measure at the start and then throughout these other time periods.
When I looked at this, I probably took a more glass half empty look at this chart than Lindsay did. When I looked at this chart, I was kind of depressed in the sense that 40% of organizations aren't measuring more or less, or aren't measuring for 6 to 12 months. And so 40% of our industry is basically missing it. And basically they're not indispensable to their organizations, because even if they are, they can't prove it. And so, I felt bad that, so many of our co-professionals here are missing the opportunity, the low-hanging fruit of tying this to the business and not doing that in some way. My second thought was I was surprised about how little started immediately. Now, listen to Lindsay, that makes sense on her response to that. But I like to look at, I don't want to develop one thing for customer education if I can't tie that to what business metric I'm trying to move. So if I don't know that, I don't want to even plan the outline of the course or the content unless I know what I'm trying to do. So if I know what I'm trying to do, then I feel like, I should be in that 25% bucket of measuring that from day one. And I take a lot of lessons from marketing, of just watching marketing professionals. They don't go 3 months. They go 1 week on anything. They go less than a week to be able to see what's happening in Google Analytics, what's working, what's not, and changing course. And so even though that's difficult to do, that's what I strive to do and strive to get my clients to see is starting with that business impact from day one as the path to success.
Yeah, John, I'd be curious to know whether it's folks in the chat or just in general, maybe a future question around the reason why things aren't being tracked or measured. And for a lot of clients or just a lot of people we speak to, the data isn't there on the back end from like the product tracking. Like, it's amazing how many SaaS businesses today can't deliver concise product usage and tracking data into a database that allows us to then merge that with customer data. So lots of times, when I'm looking at this, I'm thinking like almost like surprised, like, wow, everyone's tracking these business initiatives. But then it goes back to, are these qualitative or quantitative? So in lots of cases, when we can't merge the customer data, the product data, and the learner data, we usually start with that more qualitative, right? How many folks engage with that content and what was their feedback? Then it's like, okay, maybe we can look at like product usage for a specific app, and we can look at cohorts of folks who took the course or took the lesson. Did their product usage for that specific app increase or decrease? And you can get that pretty quickly, right? That's like that immediate within first 3 months. And then to Lindsay's point, it's like when we want to see renewal at 12 months, 18, 24 months, that's going to take some time. So I'm curious, again, I'm not going to make any assumptions here, but I'm curious if that like 1 year or more, are people thinking of like, that's at the point where I can actually start looking at impact on re-signing of subscriptions versus sooner, maybe I can't. So, just trying to figure this out. But for me, I was actually kind of surprised at how many people said they were tracking these initiatives, because my mind went to quantitatively. But my guess would be in that, immediate to 3 months, it's probably more qualitative than quantitative. And I'll shoot this back to you, John. I'm curious to know, as you work with folks who are buying LMSs, those who can track and set up integrations, how long does it usually take from like the purchase of an LMS to setting up the integration? Obviously, there's a span if it's out of the box or it's custom developed, but I'm curious of like what you've seen and how soon people can really start tying that learner data to customer and product data.
Yeah, the answer 10 years ago is different than now. Now I would say 100% or 95% of clients are integrating a CRM as the core implementation, as part of the core implementation, so that we know who the learners are, demographics about them, what they purchase, what they use, their history, and we can push training data back up to that CRM, training completion and training progress data. So almost immediately you have both sides of the equation. If you got the CRM side and you have the training side, you can get somewhere. Now, your example, Chris, I think is one of the hardest ones, is to get that data from the actual product usage and how somebody's doing it. That seems to be a challenge. And even getting that data and combining it with training data, that's what the best organizations are doing. But there's a lower hanging fruit than that. And that's the data that's in the CRM and not in the actual application. And that's could be things like renewal, but it could be things like calling support. It could be a whole bunch of different things that are being tracked in there that are available on day one, that you can see if this group took training and this group didn't, how does it impact that? So probably the best practice here is, yes, you want to have a renewal metric, and it might take you 12 months to measure that, but you got to have some short-term metrics so that you can judge your progress sooner and course correct sooner. You can't wait for a year to see if this is working.
Yeah, love that.
Yeah, John just got my recap there. I think all of you hit the nail on the head. In the research, we do ask people, like, what is a blocker to tracking and measuring impact? And some of that is all of these systems are not integrated. So we have access. It's very easy, Chris, to your point, to measure engagement data, LMS data, whatever our webinar platform is, whatever we're using for training, because we have access to that. But if we don't have access to the product analytics, we don't have access to the CRM. We don't have access to our support ticketing software. How are we supposed to measure impact? And Lindsay, you were kind of talking about like leading and lagging indicators, that there are things that tell us we're tracking in the direction. I think that's really helpful because, John, you're kind of saying we can't wait a year. We can't wait a year to show progress. We have to be communicating progress to the business and instilling confidence in them, even if it takes time to see the end result. And I'll try to find it. I had an old slide that on when we were talking about metrics and measurement, that's like, we're going to like make this impact as measured by X. Like, how are we, because Chris, like I was kind of vigorously nodding my head, the number of people who do not have product analytics to even know how frequently are users logging into the platform. You know, what parts of the product are they using? What are they not using? Like, what's the breadth and depth of feature usage? And if we don't have any way to measure product adoption, but we're trying to move the needle on product adoption, like what was the plan to like measure the impact, you know? And so I think figuring out that tracking is so important. And it's why when we talk about the education-led growth framework, it's not just starting with the business outcome of, yeah, education is going to improve retention because it's going to improve product adoption, and we're going to teach people how to use the product, and it's going to be awesome. It's, okay, well, what are we measuring? And then how are we able to measure product adoption? And then can we ultimately get to that retention number and show that? And if we can't access all that data, it's going to be really hard to do that. Yeah.
Last little point. There's a half step in between integration, and that's just getting spreadsheet downloads. And it's not ideal, but you can get downloads from the CRM team that you can use for your calculations to join manually with training data. It's not ideal, but it's better than having no data and flying blind and not being able to show anything. So if you can start to show some of those correlations, even if it's some manual lifting to do that, you'll get the money, you'll get the access to the data as a result of that effort.
All right. So this is more like less data point, more at the executive summary level, which was that strategic focus and not just team size drives education program success. And I think we often hear, like, if only I had a bigger team, I could make more of an impact. And the data says, well, maybe it's not the size of the team. Like, are we focused, and are we focused on the right things? And so curious, like, I know this was a data point that stood out to you all, because you're working with people who maybe their teams are not growing, but their education programs are growing and they're successful. So what are you seeing in your conversations with clients that's helping them to find kind of that right focus that allows them to move the needle, regardless of their ability to add headcount?
I'll start off. I think all these customer education start off as one person type things. You know, there's always the first person that's hired that has to do it all. They got to develop the curriculum, find out where to implement it, figure out the LMS. They're doing it, but success grows your team over time. And so if you start off with a small team, I think it goes back to what I said earlier. You only have so many punches. You only have so many things that you can do if you're a single person. So you got to start with the ones that have immediate business impact. And out of the 1,000 things you could potentially do, prioritize those to the ones that you can do and that you can measure that impact, because the sooner that you can get to the impact that you're having on the business, not just in cost savings, but starting there is fine. But the quicker that you can show the impact on business, the quicker that you can start building out your team of specialization. And I think the reality, though, if you have a team of 20, you're going to get a lot more done than a team of 1. So whether that 20 is efficient or not, bigger teams get more stuff done, I think is my practical analysis of it all. And you can only get that bigger team through success.
Yeah, and the strategic focus, I think that, could probably unpack that or interpret it different ways. But when I think of the collaboration within an organization, right? And that's something we always talk about, the stakeholder engagement, stakeholder management. And when you do have a strategic focus, what we find is that it's easier for the company to get around it, especially, of course, if it's coming top down. But if it's like, we're creating this educational resources, educational product to do X, and here's how the rest of the organization is going to help, assist, leverage, and work together to help move our top level business metrics, we see a lot more people getting on. There's a lot fewer roadblocks. Whereas sometimes we'll work with organizations and it's an initiative from a certain person and they're like, we're going to build this, we're going to measure it, we're going to do all these things, but it's in a silo. I know we'll get to that from a marketing perspective, but just getting things done, right? Going to the CSM team, right? That can always be a blocker of like, right now, a lot of your work is done on what we're going to try to scale for you, what we're going to try to be able to serve up to you in educational content. So you don't have to have a conversation about how to use the product on a call, but it can be more strategic. Those can become blockers really quickly. And so sometimes I think when education programs kind of go big on the content side, but don't have that focus, that can lead to issues, even if they have a big team creating 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 certifications in year one or courses in year one. If they're not strategically aligned, that content more often than not kind of sits there and isn't used in a way that can actually drive business impacts, starting from getting people there, but through those follow-up reminders, integrating into workflows, whatever that may be.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as Shannon had brought up, we talk about a education program, treating it like a product. And I constantly think about, as we treat these programs like that, if we were to talk about a product and we said, okay, we can add more and more people to our product team. We can go from 10 people to 100 people, and now our product will be that much more strategic. It doesn't necessarily mean that adding more people will help solve the problem, right? And that's going to be the same with our education programs as well, is making sure that we tap into the necessary stakeholders, work with what we have, make sure that we're trying to move the appropriate needle for the business, for our departments, and for the team as well. And so a lot of times we think the solution will be, let's add more people in and we'll be able to do more, we'll be able to create more, but that's actually not going to lead to the growth that we're talking about. And more people is not going to help the education-led growth momentum that we can see by having more of a strategic approach.
One more note, John, you said it, efficiency. Like there are sometimes these teams of 3 or 4 people and everything's reactive. Oh, we just found out product launched a new update. Now we have to go update this. Everything's manual. And so now all of a sudden you have a team of 3 or 4 folks, maybe 5, and they're constantly doing updates. Things are coming out of left field. New courses are being pushed to update old courses. How the content has been developed means an entire hour-long video, or a lot of content has to be recreated, versus having the operations, the efficiency, having your content modular so you can easily update what you need, tying back to product to understand before the product comes out or the updates come out what you need to do. And so I think that efficiency piece is a really good call out, especially when it comes to that team size, right? Like one person running an efficient program that's operationalized and has clear processes can do just as much as a team of 3 or 4 instructional designers who don't have someone on that team who's helped them design and even given them the space to be able to think about how are we going to develop this as a program that's efficient, versus you're hired, you have a course to create in the next 6 weeks. And we see that all the time. It's like not even always the individual's fault on the team. It's just what their directive is and how fast they're being asked to create content. They don't have the time to get to a place where they can be efficient.
Well, wow. It's almost like you're talking about that word governance.
Yeah.
Figuring out how you want to operationalize your team. This would be a good topic for a webinar, is how to drive efficiency in your customer education team, because that really is the flip side of this. It's not the size. It's like how much you can get done strategically.
Mm-hmm. I want to say that's coming soon. I would have to go back to the calendar, but yes. Okay. So we've kind of talked about it, marketing your program. And so we had asked people around marketing resources. What kind of marketing resources do you have? Do you do your own marketing? Do you have a dedicated marketer? Do you have dedicated resources for marketing? Do you have no resources at all? And not surprisingly, very few, like 6% of teams have a dedicated marketer on their team. So actually our next webinar today will be with Atlassian. They have a product marketer for community and learning, which is awesome. Like their job is to figure out how do we market, promote, like serve up all of this between community and learning. And then 28% of teams have dedicated resources for marketing, which is great because we're thinking about how does it work hand in hand. And I really think that your friends in customer marketing and lifecycle marketing, like they want what you have because you have the content and the tools that they need to serve up to customers to help them to be successful, right? Is at different life cycle stages. But when you all are working with people and Lindsay and Chris, you came from HubSpot, which is like came up with inbound marketing. So I think you guys really see that tie-in. And John, I know we've talked about marketing your education programs. Was there anything surprising here to you, or does this kind of mirror what you've seen trend-wise over time?
Lindsay?
Yeah, I think while it was a bit surprising, I think the reality is that this is all going to be dependent on the business, where these teams sit, and it's more so just understanding with an education program, marketing is there's no question that we need to use and pull on our marketing and distribution lever. We have a Academy program matrix, and marketing and distribution is a key component of that matrix, along with operations, along with stakeholder management, along with your tech stack. So regardless if you have a dedicated person or not, this needs to be a big component of your education program and strategy. And I think the big part here is that whether you have a dedicated person or you can tap into a team, what we're not trying to do is recreate the wheel. Like if we're treating our education program like a product, then we have a lot of great playbooks that we can borrow and use alongside our team, within our team, with a marketer, without a marketer, whatever it might be. But the piece of this here, whether anyone read this and felt discouraged and don't feel like they can get the head count, don't wait for that head count. Tap into a multi-channel approach with your marketing and match that go-to-market strategy that your marketing team has. Again, everyone will probably be looking at this differently based off of the budget that they have or the teams that they sit on or their organization. But I think the big piece of this is, regardless of what you're working with, you need to lean into marketing your program. A launch is not distribution, okay? We're talking about not just a launch, but truly distributing and allowing your users to access the education when they need it and where they need it.
Back in 2014, I wrote my first blog post on talented learning. I've got like 400 of them now. My first article, and I tried to define the skill set, a new name of the customer education professional. And what I came up with at the time was an instructional marketer, and that you had to bring the two different philosophies together into one, your instructional design and instructional hat and program design hat, and then learn the marketing side. And one thing that's common with almost all of us that come from the L&D side is that we don't know marketing. And so as we entered into customer education, that was a big gap. So my first piece of unsolicited advice is you got to close that gap. If you're on this call, you're in customer education, you got to get up to speed on marketing, and you have to understand things like audience segmentation and drip campaigns and CRMs, and understand the basics of that. With ChatGPT, that's not a big ask anymore to catch yourself up, but you have to know that. Because this chart is the reality, in my opinion. You're going to go to almost no resources, but guess what? Every single organization that's viable has a marketing department. So they're there, they're funded, they're in your organization, and they have goals too. Their goals are driving qualified leads into the pipeline. and doing things like that. So if you don't have a marketer, you first off need to understand the basics of marketing and how that ties with education. And then you need to go make friends inside the organization and go find that marketing department and understand what their goals are and see how you can use education to help them achieve their goals and get some synergy working between the two departments. Because in the end, they're always there. They're always funded. You just got to find the way to work together. And the way to work together is to find areas of mutual success. And so I think a combination of helping them achieve their goals in that first part of the customer life cycle of attracting new customers or of using your best customers to become advocates are things that marketing departments care about, and you can align with that. And I see good companies doing that all the time, good customer education organizations.
Absolutely. I mean, that's stakeholder management, right? We're right back to that. And I would say it's not even, it's in addition to the marketing department, which is the obvious go-to place to look. I would say every part of your go-to-market, whether it's the product team, the marketing team, the sales team, the service, the success, the support team, they all can be marketers for your educational content. Right? CSMs, they usually have the strongest relationship with customers. If a CSM recommends a course, there's probably a higher probability of somebody completing that course or at least looking at it and signing up than if they just get an email from customer marketing at yourbusiness.com. So I think that's also when John's saying like make friends in marketing, you're doing internal marketing to everybody who touches customers. Right? It's the support team. It might be as simple as, hey, when we have an automated, chatbot and the chatbot serves up a help article, can we also include a link to the academy? Or maybe in the help article, we have a link or we have an embedded video that goes back, right? So there's, to John's point again about understanding marketing, understanding how the communication gets to customers across the entire ecosystem. Those are all points where you might not have to have a dedicated resource, but you might be finding that alignment, a way to help another team, which goes back to the metrics question. If we can't communicate to people in the organization how working with us or promoting our content is going to benefit them, then we shouldn't be upset or offended when they say, I don't have time, I don't have resources, it's not a priority, because it can't be, because they have their own goals to hit. But when I see this marketing, it's like, I think it's a little closed. We open that up, and I would challenge everybody to look internally to find who those advocates are. It might just be one sales rep. I know at HubSpot, there was one sales rep who was closing a ton of deals leveraging the inbound certification. And he started going to new hire training and teaching the new hires in the sales team how to do it. And it kind of snowballed from there. Same on the customer success side. And lots of times, customer success managers have a ton of knowledge and a wealth of information. So not only can they be promoters of your content to your customer base or partner managers to your partners, but they can also add value to the program itself. So getting folks involved in your content development, in your content creation as kind of those subject matter experts can also then create that wheel of now I'm in it, now I'm a part of it. The CSM team is building this alongside the education program. We're even that much more excited to share it. So again, it's that concept of marketing from awareness all the way through advocacy. Your business is that lever for you, not just the marketing team.
Well said.
I think we have another data point just around marketing. And so we ask people what channels or how are you engaging and re-engaging learners over time? And predominantly email, then webinars, live sessions. And Lindsay, this reminds me a lot of what you just said around kind of launches. And I love the idea of thinking of education like a product, because where I think often product launches go wrong is we think, big fanfare, like new thing came out and let's talk about it and tell the whole world about it. And then crickets, like that's it, like a one-time deal. But good product, like marketing and communication is thinking about that in the long run of not just how do we make a big deal on day one, but how do we integrate this into whether it's onboarding or lifecycle communications or other things that customers are doing. So it's staying top of mind and it's not like a one-time push. And I think it's the same way with our education programs, is not just making some noise because we had a new certification come out, but we're continuing to market and promote that over time, that we're not losing sight of that, but we're continuing to point people here. And you don't really see it on here. But Chris, you mentioned finding internal collaborators and finding people who can promote your content. And I think that's really an underutilized channel as well. There's all these people who have access to your customers, who are talking to them, and it, like your customer success team, your sales team, your support team. Like, is your support team pointing to training content and saying, hey, have you checked out? Like, it sounds like you would really benefit from taking our workshop on reporting. Like, would you be interested in learning more about that? Like, here's the schedule, but just giving people access to those resources and making it easy for them to share. And John, you were talking about AI, like leveling the playing field. And if you've been on an Intellum webinar before, you know that I love resources. So I'm going to list off a few for people on the marketing side of things. Okay. The Marketing for Learning podcast. This is amazing because it's literally just marketing for learning, and they're hilarious. ATD, their Accidental Trainer podcast, just came out with an episode on learner engagement that you should go listen to. And then a couple months ago, we did a webinar here on marketing your education program that breaks down these different channels and gives you real life examples of what other people are doing. So if you don't understand marketing, that's okay. You're in the same boat as a lot of people. But definitely resources out there. And John, like to your point, AI can be really helpful where you don't have to like be a full-fledged marketer. You could use AI to help you out. Anything else on this idea of like marketing your program, continuing to beat the drum on your program that we should cover?
I think what I would say here, ditto to everything that you just said, Shannon, but especially if we are going to, I'll get on my soapbox again about treating education like a product. If this is going to be our product, right, then re-engagement is going to be your retention strategy, right? So how can we then use all of these different channels in the same way product would to allow for that re-engagement? It absolutely makes sense that we see email at the top here, right? It's accessible, it's scalable, it's easy to use. But if we are going to be serious about education-led growth, right, we can't just stop at the inbox. We have to be accessing these channels and making sure we're meeting our learners with the right education when they need it.
We have at our disposal, we have good, with learning management systems, good training progress data. So a good best practice is really looking at a particular course or certification, for example, and find out when people are dropping out of it for one reason or another. You know, some people go 100%, some people only go 10, some people are, are always falling out at the same. And then what you can do is you can create an email campaign to help people through that course by proactively saying, we know at the 10-day mark, this happens. So let's have something go out at 10 days. Let's have something go out at 2 weeks. What's if they don't get this done by this certain date? And you can put those, that's what they do in email campaigns for marketing. They have basically a flow. And if you click on the email or you don't click on the email, or if you click on a link or don't click on a link, something else can happen. And so by proactively setting something like that up, you can help push people through your program and re-engage them and do that as a formal process. That's not day one stuff. That's pretty sophisticated, but that's what the best organizations are doing to try to get that completion rate up, because they've already tied it to business. So they know if they get more people to get that certification, they're going to get more of what they're already been getting from a revenue standpoint. And so that's a way that you can do it.
That's if I could like zoom in on the slide, automated reminder emails for incomplete courses. Only 35% of people are using these. Like, you could turn that on, and I don't want to say set it and forget it, because I don't think that anything in business should be set it and forget it, but you don't have to remember to do that all the time. A lot of learning management systems, Intellum included, will allow you to automatically remind people to go finish incomplete courses. And I'll also we had a roundtable last year, and CJ Mills at Trellix said, the point of learning is not completion. The point is that someone gets the point. So it could also be if someone has a like a course and people are getting 10% of the way through, was that the point? Like, did they get it and then they were able to move on? So looking too at, is it just we created this long thing and it didn't need to be that long, and we just we got them to where we wanted them to get to, is really helpful to think too about, like, maybe it's not even reminding them, maybe it's we just needed to create shorter content that got them to their next step.
Yeah, or they already knew 80% of it, and that one module, the beginning of the course, the middle of the course, if it's open-ended and you don't have to follow through it linearly, might be all they need. And I think that's where sometimes, as customer education professionals, we think of learners because we're trying to educate people, and we forget that they're customers and users of products first. And so I think even if it's just in your communications internally, as you're looking to build advocates and have folks kind of recommend and push people towards your learning, if we think of them as users who either have an aptitude and are interested in learning, or who have already learned, we should be asking ourselves, how do we help these users achieve their goals in the product? And if this product of educational content can be used, let's deliver that. And I know that goes to like personalization and how we're finally getting more data to understand those things. But I'm a big believer in, like, let's think of them as users, as people. And let's think of the learning as something that's helps them achieve what they're trying to do in the product and their job, as opposed to thinking as customer education professionals, our job is to get them to learn. It is, but they're people and users first. The learning is what's going to hopefully accelerate their success with the product or whatever strategy they're trying to learn.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I bet if you asked all the customer education universities, all the users of all that content across the world, almost nobody would categorize themselves as a learner. They're probably not looking at that like that at all. That's not what they're there for. They're there because they're users and they can't get something done.
Absolutely. Oh, I love that. Yeah. Thinking about what is it that people are trying to do. And I think that's where you can get to. I've even thought about onboarding. There's account onboarding, and then there's new user onboarding. And there's people who are coming in who have used your product before at a different company, or who have used a similar product. And so their learning curve is different than, like, I have literally never touched anything like this before. Like, take me back to level one, and to really, I think that's where we get into more advanced segmentation and where AI and personalized learning can be really helpful. But even, Lindsay, you've talked before about modular content creation and just breaking it down, where instead of it being this long video or long course and forcing people to go through the whole thing, can we break it into smaller pieces that people can kind of we can piece it together, or they can piece it together to help them get to where they're trying to go, or like what makes the most sense for them.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know if I'm allowed to have two soapboxes in one.
No,
webinar.
you're allowed. You're allowed.
Modular training is my other favorite soapbox, and actually kind of ties well into the last data point that we have. But the idea with modular training, and when we're looking to approach all of these different initiatives that we can do with education, if we have things in a modular way, we can be able to market our education to multiple audiences in different channels. We can reach other audiences as well. We can approach things for onboarding. We can allow things to be used in app. So by having the right, also going back to Chris's point about making sure we're treating our program and operationalizing it for effectiveness, if we can have that architecture in place, it really helps to solve for strategically approaching multiple initiatives and being then able to appropriately market and distribute those.
Have more efficiency, get more done with less team members because you're strategically reusing content pieces, building blocks. So there's a great way of laying that foundation out. Imagine if you don't do that for 10 years and then you try to reverse engineer it. It's almost impossible. But if you get started yesterday, you can build that foundation up that'll allow you to be much more nimble.
Yeah, this final data point, and this is just kind of a sampling that we've chosen to talk about today. There's more in the report, which you'll find under the video here. Was that organizations with multiple initiatives. And so if we think of initiatives as things like onboarding or skills development or product enablement. People who are doing multiple things report higher effectiveness. And so I think we thought this, or specifically like revenue effectiveness, that these things are making a difference for the business. And Lindsay, you were talking about kind of if this content can be repurposed for multiple ways, like now you're meeting more needs of the business, but you're putting in the same amount of effort kind of up front.
Yep, exactly. And I know that within this report, some of the initiatives we were referring to, you mentioned it, right? We had skills and enablement, onboarding, certification, compliance. It was interesting to see where even some of those metrics fell. I think 64% of folks had a certification initiative. And by having things in this modular approach, we now have the flexibility to repurpose and do some of these initiatives. We're not saying that there has to be a significant amount of cost or time. If we're approaching this from, as John said yesterday, then we can have things be repurposed and packaged in the way that our learners are looking to access it as well.
Mm-hmm. How I like to help my clients think about this is just through the basic customer life cycle. And the way I define it or like to think about it is there's the pre-contract or the pre-customer phase, there's the onboarding phase, there's the ongoing support phase, and then there's the developing your best users into advocates and growing your advocate phase. And so when you look at those 4 different phases, generally they're owned by different parts of the organization, from marketing to sales to product to operations. And so by looking at the 4 different areas and finding impact that you can make in each of those areas, you're really working your way across all the different stakeholders inside the organization for one, but you're providing the most value. And you'll be able to do what Lindsay's saying then, because what you need for pre-sales and onboarding, they're interlocking circles. So there's part of the content is applicable for both, and for growing new users and for advocates. And so by thinking about all the 4 phases and developing in that soapbox modular format, you have the ability to really hit that adaptive personalized learning everywhere in that life cycle. And that's maximizing your ability to maximize your impact.
I feel like we brought it full circle. Beginning talking about efficiency. All right. Well, we are at time today. I'm just going to give everybody a heads up. So today we're kind of back to back talking about different aspects of education-led growth. Up next, we're going to hear from Atlassian, kind of talking about where have they been, what have they done, what have they learned, what progress have they made, and thinking about the future of learning interventions. So how are we meeting the learner where they're at and keeping the learner first and foremost. And then I also want to encourage you all to save the date. Today, we had 3 back-to-back sessions on education-led growth in September. We're having a whole day. We're taking a whole day just to talk about how are companies using education to drive business impact. And so you'll hear from a bunch of speakers then. I want you to go ahead and add that to your calendar so you don't schedule any, off-sites, important meetings for that day. But we have that. Thank you, Chris and Lindsay. And hold on, let's see if we can get the gallery view here. Here we go, Brady Bunch. Thank you, Chris, for joining us today and sharing your insights. I want to encourage everybody to go follow them, connect with them on LinkedIn, go subscribe. They each have their own newsletters where they're sharing great content insights every week. But thank you all for coming. And then thank you, everybody who tuned in today.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great one.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.